All right, so welcome everybody. We have about 45 minutes to 12 o'clock. Robin, what's our?
Yeah, we've got till 12.
To 12, okay, great. And let me get my notes here. So as we, actually, do we have the clicker? Okay, great. So actually, as before we get started, to set a little bit of context for this panel about building the entrepreneurial ecosystem, I want to take just a few seconds to put it into context. So yesterday, as we talked about the what I'm calling University 3.0 is as ecosystems of education and disruption. Oh, I've got to stand.
You got to stand in the light.
Otherwise, you can't see me. I'm just very, very dark. I'll actually sit down. This is a very interesting. Okay, so, and if we now, that would make for good YouTube
streaming
content.
It'll be fun. Someone will put it in YouTube.
Exactly. And so if the universities are an ecosystem and we think about entrepreneurial culture as an emergent property of many ecosystems interacting, we're now probably in the second or third iteration of thinking about how entrepreneurial ecosystems develop. And so just to take a very concrete example, for example, of the university, we're being asked at the university to not only do the things about education, but then to do things that normally you wouldn't associate with a university. So for example, up here, spinning off a biotechnology competition, for example, with MIT, iGEM-E, working with and analyzing entrepreneurial ecosystems and seeding them around the world, which is part of REAP. MISTI Mexico, which is a very interesting program of having MIT students come to Mexico over the summer and work with startups and work with other organizations that are part of the ecosystem. And Mexico is just one of many, and I know there's several entrepreneurs here that have worked with them. And then also working with the diaspora of Mexicans in different parts of the world, but specifically in Boston, for example, La Red de Talentos de Boston is a group of technologists, scientists, and entrepreneurs in the life sciences, in materials engineering, and of course in digital media. And then lastly, the Enterprise Forum, which is a global network of alumni that work to promote entrepreneurship in the local region. And hopefully, in the next few weeks, we'll have the first MIT Enterprise Forum in Mexico. Stay tuned. Let me know if you want to help. So with that as a context, what we have up here is actually a representation from each one of those individual ecosystems. And so as to start and to follow a little bit of tradition over the last 48 hours now, perhaps we can start with 30 seconds from each of our panelists as an introduction. And oops, we can now take the PowerPoint away. And if in your introduction, 30 seconds, but also answer the question about what is unique about Mexican entrepreneurial ecosystem development that you think we should pay attention to, given your experience, and what is universal as a participant in whatever sub-ecosystem you have developed. So David, kick it off.
Hey everyone, my name is David Weekly. In the San Francisco Bay Area, I helped start Super Happy Dev House, which was spread rather virally to Mexico by some people here in the audience. And I think one of the things that makes the Mexican hacker ecosystem so wonderful is, A, there are so many of these events. There are now more dev houses that have happened in Mexico than in the United States, and how this has turned into an explosion of startup weekends, and now we get this explosion of technology teams and companies that are building amazing things. And I think in particular, the high design sensibility, we heard about some of that in the keynote this morning, but one of the things that really jumped out at me about the Mexican hacker ecosystem in particular is not just that they're good engineers, but they're good engineers working with good designers to build well-designed products that can compete on the global stage. And that makes Mexico interesting.
Thanks.
Hi again, I'm Ariel Muslera with the Latin American Venture Capital Association. So I think that Mexico, as was mentioned before, is right now at a crossroads. From LAVCA, what we see is that there's a lot of buzz, and we've seen that happen to Brazil a few years ago. So the challenge, or I feel that it's the big opportunity, is to to take advantage of that. I haven't been to Mexico many times, but I see that there's a lot going on, and I'm hoping that we can see more and more entrepreneurs coming out of Mexico and getting successful stories, because I believe that the market is there, and everything that was said during the last 48 hours is a really powerful story. So it's up to you guys to take advantage of it.
Hi, my name is Nobotsuka. I'm sorry to say that I'm pinch hitting for Fernando Jimenez. He has actually been tied up with the kind of what's happening in Haiti, so sorry about that. I'm working for the Multilateral Investment Fund at the IDB, and I remember that I created a first venture fund in Guanajuato 10 years ago. I'm amazed today by the presentation of wider representatives saying that we have tons of incubator, particularly 500. And before we're thinking about maybe Chile is the best country in terms of the ecosystem, but today probably Mexico surpasses that. So amazed that.
Thank you.
Yes, good morning. I'm Roberto Albisetti with the IFC World Bank for Mexico and Central America. We at the IFC have been following the creation of new enterprises in Mexico, particularly in the last 8 years. We have participated in 10 funds. The last one, the first venture fund investment for us. What I see particularly positive in Mexico in terms of ecosystem is what we call an interesting, and it is confirmed here in this meeting, in these 2 days, spillover effect from the United States, both on the creation and development of ideas and on the educational modules that are replicated. We know that there is no one size fit all, and these kind of experiences have to be rationalized based on the tissue that exists in the economy at the local and regional level. So this is the particularity. We also see that, I would say, innovation is not a prerogative of the high-tech or ICT industry. And Mexico is to some extent leading the way, increasing productivity with applied innovation and technology to the high value-added manufacturing sector. So this is what we see.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Arturo Galvan. Maybe the oldest tech entrepreneur in Mexico, because I've been doing this for my last 25 years. I founded my first tech company in 1988, and it's been a roller coaster from there. And it's been 7 companies now. The latest one, Naranya, it's in the mobile ecosystem. And what I believe is that I really believe that in this ecosystem, because I've been doing this for many years. And what is exciting now is that there's a lot of people joining the party, and it was only me dancing in the floor a few years ago, and it was tough. It's like the salmon just going upstream, And but now it looks like the river is going the other way around, and I can see a lot of people joining. And what I think is also different is that the kind of people that you find in the ecosystem in Mexico is full of passion. I think that's comes with the Latin, I think, kind of way of looking at things. You know, it's a talent and passion combination that you don't get to see in many places. And it might be because we feel that it's finally the time for Mexico, and we all are excited about it, and so it's getting more exciting and more passionate about it. So I think it's a great time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy from Agave Lab. I want to congratulate all of you guys for hanging around to the absolute bitter end here. I realize lunch is looming, so we'll be brief. So I was 15 years in San Francisco in the startup and venture world, and moved down here 5 years ago. So I've experience in startup world in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, and in Guadalajara, where Agave Lab is. And how the ecosystem is different here, I'm not sure. I've been trying to understand like some of the societal, cultural differences, and there are some things that stick out. I don't know whether they're just my own wacky imagination, but it does seem like one of the critical differences I see here is so much of business is operated in Mexico on almost a dynastic level, where families, long strings of grandparents and parents and children, all the money tends to flow in that direction. Where in San Francisco, everyone just arrived last year, so there is none of that. So it's in San Francisco, it's more of a pure-based economy based on merit, without a lot of thinking about like who's related to who, and you just don't have that in Mexico. It plays out in some strange ways, which I'm still trying to figure out.
Thank you. So since each of you represent a different sub-ecosystem in some way in your experience, I actually have some specific questions for each of you. And starting with you, David, you've been a long time and prolific contributor to the Silicon Valley ecosystem, specifically in collaborative spaces, whether it's physical or digital. And also you're a mentor, a very important aspect that we've talked about. And you're also a recipient of the benefits as a startup founder. Can you talk about kind of what it is that drives you to do that, and what is it about the institutions or the organizations that you first came in contact with that allowed you and inspired you to continue to do that?
Sure. So I think a lot of the positive cultural aspects that make Silicon Valley work so well are aspects of culture that can be and are copied other places. And I think a lot of that comes from the particular history of the Silicon Valley in terms of both being established from a gold rush, right, where hard work was necessary but not sufficient for wealth, right? And this notion that anyone could make it, provided you worked hard enough and were lucky enough. Then combining that with the hippie movement of, you know, hey, we should all work together. You know, this sort of fierce dog-eat-dog kind of competitiveness is not productive. Turned out to be a really good way of approaching new markets, because if two people are going after a brand new market, if they start off trying to fight each other, they're not going to be focused on growing the market, right? Where I think there's this notion that if the market is really growing as big as we think it is, then we should help each other go and grow this market, and we'll both do well. If it's not as big as we think it is, both of us are kind of screwed, right? So you take this kind of combination of thoughts that we're going to need to work hard, that may or may not lead to success, but we're going to work hard anyhow. We're going to need to try a lot of different things, and we're going to need to help each other in that, right? That was just something that was out there in California, and that I really loved. There was a pay-it-forward mentality. There were people available in the ecosystem who were helping me, who were so far beyond me, who were already so popular and so wealthy that I couldn't meaningfully give back to them, right? And so it was this notion that, okay, I needed to turn around and take whatever wisdom I was able to garner from the entrepreneurial process and pass it on and mentor other people. So that's kind of a lot of the spirit that I distilled from Silicon Valley, in that when I've seen entrepreneurial ecosystems in other places like Mexico doing well, they take those same ideas, right? And so they are actively seeking mentorship at the same time as they are mentoring themselves, right? And they are sharing with each other. They're not afraid to go and share those ideas. They're openly discussing, openly helping each other, and just excited to be building together. Because an entrepreneurial ecosystem starts with the entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurship is all about building. That's what we got from the last panel. It's not about pitching. It's about actually building product that actually has traction. And then investors need to do what they can to support that. And so I take a look at how do we get those people excited about building, how do we encourage them, how do we help them, how do we build community for them, right? How do we help them in the building of that community?
So it's a combination of the hippie movement merging with business.
Yeah.
I love it.
Hippie gold miners.
How many hippies do we have in the room? All right, excellent.
Old hippie.
Arturo, coming back perhaps to that business aspect as well, you've been a founder, you've worked with a large company when the company you founded was acquired. You're now, again, a founder of a company. Large established companies are a significant but sometimes underthought part of those ecosystems. How do you work with them? How do you develop relationships? How do you maintain those relationships and not get stomped, as to use a common theme here?
That's a great question. It's big companies. They're very important because they always leave a space for small companies to develop. Because big companies are big because they're big, just like that. I mean, they have huge assets. They have huge customer bases. They're complex. They move slow. So that opens opportunities. And for all the members of the ecosystem, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, if you look at those guys and see, I mean, what are they doing wrong? What are the opportunities around that company? You name a company. I mean, we had Televisa here, we had Telefonica here. Big companies, they're always striving for new ideas, and they cannot really deliver them. So that is for us to detect and to develop the product and partner with them at a certain point of time, or eventually an M&A transaction, that could be another option. It's always looking at them as a way of getting ideas of how to create a new opportunity for your business.
But do you keep an ongoing relationship with them, or do you keep them hands off, or do you find the inner hippies and the executives that work there? How do you make that connection?
It's a arm's length relationship, I think. It's you have to be close, so you can touch a little bit of it, and learn and understand what are they facing, and then go back and to your office and think and develop the ideas that you have, because it's pretty obvious. I mean, when you go to these companies, you know what are their problems and their challenges they're facing. It's they're full of opportunities. But yeah, you have to be close to them. I mean, all my life I've been close to big companies, and I also worked for one of those, Telefonica. I worked for them because they acquired my company, and it was 3 years working for them. It was pretty complex, and I learned a lot about their incapacity of really being innovative. They're striving to do it, and I'm sure they will do some, but big innovation will not come from them.
Thank you. Ariel, you've been a consultant. You've worked with LAVCA, a professional organization, and now you're also an investor. And so I want to focus on the professional organization aspect of the ecosystem. What is the role of professional organizations in developing the ecosystem? How do you maintain them? What is it about the professional organizations that needs to be there, and what do they need to support? How do they interact with the other ecosystems, sub-ecosystems?
Well, in the case of LAVCA, the way we see ourselves is that we're a facilitator and a way of bringing best practices from one Latin American market to another one, and also from Silicon Valley and other more developed ecosystems into Latin America. We are pretty active in creating spaces where Latins can communicate and exchange points of view with more advanced places like Silicon Valley.
What's it mean to create spaces?
Just do events. Do events like this one. We also run events in New York, in Silicon Valley, with some partners.
In Cambridge?
In Cambridge, not yet, but we can. It's our next move, and that's really helpful. I mean, I've been with LAVCA since 2008, and it's amazing how the whole thing, especially in venture capital, because we cover also private equity, but in venture capital, I think that organizations like us, organizations like Endeavor, of course, that's been around for more years, are very powerful in bringing together people with the same kind of sense of urgency on building this type of ecosystems. And since 2009, I moved back to Argentina. I'm originally from there, and Argentina is a perfect example on how an ecosystem was built against all odds, almost. And a big part of that was that not organizations, but almost like a grassroots movement came up from the bottom of people that went through the cycle of creating their own companies and selling them and wanting to be mentors of new entrepreneurs. And I think that's really powerful.
Interesting, thank you. And Andy, you're now working with U.S. companies, entrepreneurs, doing nearshoring here in Mexico, Guadalajara. The role of the entrepreneur that is able to cross borders and going to what you were talking about, creating those spaces, what is the role of that entrepreneur that has those kind of a foot in each organization and each culture, if you will?
I guess, is this thing on?
The switch.
You get the dead one. So I don't know whether nearshoring is a good term for what we're doing. So generally what I do is I look for executives, CEOs in the Bay Area that want to build their MVP, but they want to do it on the super cheap. And so they partner up with us, and we do the development, the design, and then we help them get funded to their seed round. So we're sort of, I guess, pre-seed. I guess the thing you put the seed in, that would make us dirt, I suppose. So the role of that, or what we do, is changing a little bit. Originally, I was trying to bring Silicon Valley values to Mexico, and some of that worked, some of it didn't. I realized it's a different culture here. And now I'm actually trying to, my role now has evolved to be more Mexico-focused. Part of our portfolio are companies, early stage companies in Mexico, to help them to get started. So I guess, obviously, I've got a 15-year history in San Francisco in the venture and startup world, so I'm bringing a lot of that heritage with me. But my goal here is to encourage the startups here to, a little bit of a backdrop. One of the things I'm seeing with a lot of startups here in Mexico is it appears that they're very funding focused, where people are looking at getting the round, and that seems to be the end as opposed to a means. And my role here is as a coach to them to say, stop waiting, start coding. So that's one of the things I liked about Mexico, is that it is so cost efficient that you can seed 10, 15 companies, and you can start at a very small level. I mean, just spend a couple weekends and a couple weeks and try to turn 100 pesos into 1,000 pesos. So start at that really low level. And encourage people to don't wait for funding, get started right away, build a business that's scalable, that's sustainable, and then pursue funding after you've got the DNA of the company sort of worked out.
Interesting. So, does this? Yeah. So I want it recorded and to give due credit that it's no longer just about seed funding, but dirt funding. Is that what we're
Yes.
calling it? All right. So it's now for posterity, dirt funding. Moving on, and so the four panelists that we've spoken to so far are all in digital media, in internet. Let's move a little bit out of there, Roberto, and let's talk about the rest of that is not internet. That is certainly enabled, it's supported. I was reading that the IFC has made a commitment to sustainable projects in Latin America, and that you're now talking about sustainable housing, about infrastructure, renewable energy, long-term funding for SMEs. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, what I have seen in my recent professional career as an investment banker in the last 10 years, I must say that Mexico is riding the wave, and I found Mexico far ahead compared with some emerging countries nearby, like very fashionable Colombia, or some Eastern European countries that are graduating from support from multilaterals like Czech Republic, Romania, and so forth. However, going to what you were asking, yes, we see that in Mexico there is a lot of ferment in bringing forward new ideas. For example, a couple of important clients that we have supported with equity investments are ESCOs. For example, one is an ESCO from Monterrey. It's called Optima Energia, that was also nurtured by Endeavor. And then there is another one that is more on the financial side, but still an ESCO that is called Water Capital. Is another company where we invested. What do we do? They have brought an ESCO model from the United States into Mexico, and they have created the sort of leasing arrangement that is self-liquidating to make improvements, for example, in
Everyone's okay.
Nothing wrong.
For our viewers at home,
I'm
we're
awake.
still here.
That nothing to do with sustainability. and for example, they have done a lot of good work to increase attention to efficiency and saving water and adding, for example, solar panel in the tourism sector. But what I have seen in Mexico, and I wanted to say, is something that the lesson learned that we can say we have in Mexico is that we all compete for price and quality, but also for innovation and applied innovation to manufacturing industry in particular. And if we look outside Mexico and we see where innovation have been applied outside the high-tech ICT industry, we have a few interesting examples that we may look at. I'm talking about Starbucks, IKEA, VW in Germany, Zara in Spain, and why not Le Cirque du Soleil in Canada? No? So there is innovation that is being applied to a broad array of sectors. And Mexico, I think, is showing the ability to create clusters where innovation is applied thoroughly in the different segments. Now, these cases that I have mentioned around the world, what do they have in common? They are all big enterprises. And they are traditional sectors applying innovations. And they need to adopt, and they have shown that they can adopt new technology to gain productivity and not just efficiency. So what I mean is that innovation does not only originate, for example, from R&D. No? There is a myth of the fact that R&D creates innovation, and I read in a report from Columbia University that 70% of innovation is created by workers within the company, the industry, and only 10% by applied R&D units. So what means is that we have, as an ecosystem and also as an educational system, in corporate world, we have to enhance and facilitate creativity and talent by people who are working with us. So, for example, this 20% free time idea to work on your own project is something that is a good practice to be applied to a much broader horizon.
Interesting. So, in summary, if you're not an internet entrepreneur, there is still hope, for one. And two, that even if you're not looking at fundamental research as the base, there's also hope. You actually can create a lot of value.
You can create a lot of value also intensifying the network and the ecosystem around the supply chain. A lot of innovation is being spun off, and particularly in Mexico, the facilitation and the support, also through credit, to the supply chain system is not going to create only more employment, but is going to create a reservoir of capacity and skills applied to new technology and innovation that can be bought at cheaper prices compared whether they are developed internally.
May I add one more comment on that thought? I just came from a board meeting a couple of days ago with one of our companies, and they were struggling to come up with some growth areas for the next few years. And we discussed, really hard about where we came up with ideas, and this is a company that is providing services to the financial services industry. And I encouraged them to talk to their clients. And it's a practice that not a lot of companies do. So it's not just talking about your own, giving them, the employees, the free time to think about ways of improving the business. It's also talking to your clients. And I also told them that because you're implementing stuff at the client, sometimes you have a lot of your own employees interacting at a lower level, like the analysts, the implementators, the guys that go and sit down with the next guy inside the companies, and they don't have a formal process to pick these guys' brains. And it's really important, if you want to be an innovator, to ask your own people and the people that are on the other side as your customer, what can we do better? What are the other things that are hurting you that we can solve?
And employees are not often thought as part of the ecosystem, and yet they are such a significant part of that. Thank you. Nobu, thank you for pinch hitting for Fernando. And one thing that strikes me about your organization is that I was reading the core mission of the MIF is to be a laboratory for development and to experiment and then diffuse the knowledge that you've learned from those experiments. Tell us about your role, and what is the role of organizations like yours in kind of being that connective tissue, if you will, as an NGO?
Yeah, very good questions. Probably this is for our marketing itself, right? But the difference between our organization or our fund specifically and, let's say, IFC, we don't have to be rated in the market, So that's a big difference. So that's why that means we can do many, many very crazy things, right? So 10 years ago, we created a venture capital fund where there's no SECADE or regulations kind of thing like that, because we just wanted to do something, innovative things. The venture capital fund 10 years ago, managed by, let's say, NGO, looking at small companies, size of investments of $250,000, take equity, minority shareholder, where minority shareholder protection is not there. So this is a very, very crazy thing that happened. Actually, I believe that I created, stimulated discussion at the level of the government and other players in the ecosystem. Actually led to the discussion and further development, the regulatory framework, and other elements of ecosystem. We did, let's say, guarantee fund, seed fund, angels, incubator, network incubator, innovation, open innovation, and reverse innovation. So many things, because we believe that we got to do something beginning. Otherwise, nobody actually can take risk. In the private sector, actually, is much more, conservative. Probably this is probably, to a certain extent, we have to protect fiduciary risk of the money of the taxpayers. But at least we have some trial and error process so that we have at least some level of discussion. We created LAVCA. We created generation of knowledge to be shared with other type of the industry itself. To me, I think this is a role we should play as development institution. But again, because special nature of the fund itself, we don't have to be in the market, so we don't raise the money from the market. If that's the case, I wouldn't be able to do that.
So now we can open it up to any member of the panel. Given that we have this audience and our audience on the net, if you were to think about something that, or let's say choose a member of the ecosystem and compliment them on things that they've done right, but then also focus on the things that perhaps we've forgotten about. What is it that we need to emphasize more that hasn't been emphasized?
Just a quick point, and this is more of a question to the crowd and to the panel. We talk about developing an ecosystem, and out of that ecosystem, these companies, successful business models of companies will emerge. And I'm sort of San Francisco pre-Netscape, if you can imagine. It didn't happen that way. What happened in San Francisco is the ecosystem emerged from the successes. So first you had successful business models, and then an ecosystem formed around it. And I see that it's one of the things that I see in Mexico. There's a lot of talk about building a fertile ground from which these companies are going to sprout. But I wonder if it would be more efficient for us to dedicate some of our attention to what are the specific things that companies need, and how do we prop up a couple high-value success stories that are visible and quite successful, and then use that momentum to build an ecosystem around it. And just a comment I'd like to get people's thoughts on.
Yeah, actually I have one, because I'm from Japan. I was raised in Japan, so always thinking about all those big companies like Sony and Panasonic actually started with the small, right? So in 1945, when Japan lost the war, there was no ecosystem anyway. So other type of the innovations in Japan actually has been created, because it's not because of the enabling environment ecosystem. It's rather the opposite. It's just despite the fact that the ecosystem was really adversary to the entrepreneur, actually they came up with new ideas. So, and I'm also citing the example of the talk of Daniel Eisenberg, who is a professor at Babson College. He has programmed the Babson ecosystem, building ecosystem entrepreneurial ecosystem program, and we always laughing at each other because that people talking about Israel as an ecosystem. But he actually, from Israel, he always says that, if you want to emulate Israel, you should start war, right? But anyway, so I think each ecosystem has a different, idiosyncrasy, so that we probably shouldn't create or prescribe what ecosystem is all about. Maybe should just facilitate.
So adversity is part of, and perhaps a stimulant of, ecosystem development. Interesting.
Well, thankfully we have lots of that here.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I guess Argentina is also a good example of an adverse situation and how this tends to help an ecosystem. I think that in general, being an entrepreneur is a really lonely business in a sense. You kind of like start with nothing, and you have to build a company, and that company needs to raise money, and then they need to acquire customers. It's a really uphill battle. So I kind of feel that in most cases there's more likelihood to create an ecosystem from the bottoms up, just because these are all people that are usually tend to be young, tend to be ambitious, tend to think big. And they are alone, and so if you can create, I insist with this idea of space or some way for all these guys to get together and share their visions and also share their fears of being so alone, and getting hopefully some good advice from people that are a few years ahead of them in terms of experience. I think that's the most valuable way of creating an ecosystem. Anything else helps. But if you have that, I think that you can have an ecosystem anywhere, and some of the examples that were mentioned are proof of that. And the other thing is that from a government standpoint, I spent some time when I came back to Argentina talking to some government officials at the national level and at the municipal level, and they were trying to come up with some programs as you have here in Mexico for the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and when they ask me what I've seen around and what I think it works and it doesn't work, I think the answer I always gave to them is, if you can find a way from a regularity standpoint to make the process of creating a new company easier, that's it. You don't need money. You need to create big funds or funds of funds. Just help guys create companies with the least amount of trouble. And in Argentina, it's you can spend 6 months just to open a bank account. So,
thank you. And I know, Roberto, Arturo, you are jumping or to get in here. Roberto and then Arturo.
I just wanted to add one thing on the role of the government in the ecosystem, particularly in the special moment that Mexico is living these weeks. And maybe when we are talking about, for example, innovation policy, we should not indulge in the temptation, for example, to create, through government action, clusters of industries to be promoted, because this is totally left to the market. So this is not the role of innovation policy for government. Government should focus on the enabling environment only. And that's an important part of the equation. The other part is that we have cases in Mexico where it can be facilitated to create more competitiveness, for example, in the aerospace industry and even more in the auto part industry, where a lot of process innovation and product innovation has been done. So there is a lot of work to be done and potential to be exploited there.
I think that is not a matter of building the ecosystem. I think the ecosystem is there. You have all the members in place. It could be bigger or more complex, but it's already there. Marcus Danto's presentation on before it shows that the ecosystem is complete. All the pieces are there. What I feel is missing is connecting the dots. The ecosystem has to be connected. And for instance, I believe that one of the important pieces of the ecosystem is the mentoring. I think there's a lot of young entrepreneurs today in Mexico that they really need mentoring. And the mentors are there, and they really want to help, but the connection is not there. So when I have the chance to, because I like to go to these startup weekends and things like that, and I visit these teams working on the weekend, and I see a lot of passion and good ideas and talent. The team is there. They're not pitching me, but at the end of the day, you can notice who's good or who's not. But at the same time, they really need mentoring. And what I believe happens in Silicon Valley is that the dots are connected. I mean, if you need help, you just go and have a coffee in Starbucks, and right next to your table will be somebody that's an expert or knows somebody that's an expert. So it's pretty easy to get access to knowledge, to expertise. And that's why the ecosystem of the Silicon Valley works. It's not the only reason, of course, but it's a very important reason. So from my perspective, what is missing is not building the ecosystem, but it's connecting the dots of the ecosystem. And I think that there are companies and organizations working on this as we speak. I believe that Endeavor is one of the best, if not the best, on doing this and really finding the talent and nurturing this talent with the mentoring and helping grow fast. And I think that we need Endeavor to succeed, but we need a lot more endeavors to really make this happen.
And you are an Endeavor entrepreneur.
Yes, that is my case, yes. I'm really proud to be that.
Thanks. David, did you have a comment?
Yeah, a couple. So I very much resonate with the governments that ask the question, how do we foster entrepreneurial ecosystems? The best answer, I think, is get the heck out of the way, right? that entrepreneurs want to build. They build because they can't help but build. It may be irrational. Maybe they could make more money going to work for a big company, right? But they're entrepreneurs just because they love that building process. And the more that you can do to get out of their way, the more of them that you'll see. You don't have. It's like asking the question, how do you make a child curious, right? And the answer is you don't. kids are naturally curious. You just take their questions seriously, right? And so I think there's the same role for government to play. I think there's another aspect in terms of connecting entrepreneurs with each other that was also touched on that's really important, which is the emotional support that entrepreneurship requires, because entrepreneurship is emotionally brutal, right? Because at every given point, you're on the edge of success and you're on the edge of certain failure, and it's terrifying. And if you don't have peer support from other people who are also in charge of their companies, because you can't lean on the people who report to you and say, oh my God, the company's about to fold. You know, that doesn't tend to work out so well. You need to be able to go to your peers who are also running companies and say, I don't know how we're going to make payroll in 2 weeks. Like, do you have any tips for what I should do in this situation, right? And so I think those kind of meetings that are connecting peers are really important. And then finally, I take a look at what are companies here blocked on? What is not moving as fast as it could be? And there's some very straightforward answers that pop out of that regarding payments. You know, with Mexico having less than 25% credit card penetration rate, the actual checkout process is difficult, which has been something that a bunch of our companies at Mexican VC have stubbed their toes on, right? Is that checkout is kind of wacky here. And so I think that's actually an interesting commercial opportunity then for companies to come in and fill those gaps for profit that exist within the ecosystem and self-accelerate. And again, this is one of these things that you see in Silicon Valley, where a lot of the hot startups in Silicon Valley are producing tools used by hot startups in Silicon Valley. So the ecosystem has become self-accelerating. And the more that we can see this here in Mexico, I think we're just going to see it take to the moon.
So with that, actually, that was I think our last comment, given our time. Lynn and Robin, you put us in a treacherous spot between golfers and the golf course. So with that, I think we're going to have to wrap it up. Please join me in giving a round of applause and thank you to our panelists. We'll continue the conversation on Twitter and at lunch as well. Robin, Lynn?